welcome to the Candice and Elisa show. We're very excited to have our first episode. And Candice, I just wanted to talk to you because one of the most topical things that we have at the moment are the protests that are sweeping the world with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was wondering if, to begin with, you could just talk to me and to our viewers about what the Black Lives Matter movement means to you and what does it represent?
Yeah, I'm so excited, first and foremost, that in doing the show, but more importantly, that we're addressing something that's so crucial and that's so critical. And for me, when I think of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's more about, giving assistance and help to communities that actually need it at this particular time. And the reason I explain it in that way is because I know anytime we say Black Lives Matter, there will be one person who's going to come and say, all lives matter. But it's really the analogy of saying that, okay, there's 4 houses on a row. One house is on fire. We're not going to say, fire department, start at the first block and work your way back to the house that's actually burning. We're just going to give water to the house that needs it, right? And so to me, it's so important for people to understand that what we're saying is, historically speaking, Black lives have not mattered. And today we're asking that we mobilize to make sure that, yes, we eventually get to a point where all lives matter, but we focus on the lives that are currently at risk and that don't matter in society.
Absolutely. And how can we, as people from different communities, so myself from the Latin community, but also from, white communities, what can we do to support the cause without overstepping our bounds, but also without being considered passive, like we're condoning what is going on?
Yeah, and I think it's so important. And I appreciate that you're asking that question because I think for a very long time, silence has been condoning, right? It comes down to that phrase that the only time for evil to triumph is for good men to stand back and do nothing. And so for me, it's so important that we all mobilize, all of us from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and we say, we will not stand for this any longer. And how do we do that? We educate ourselves, right? Because I think historical education has been lost. So much of what we learn about society and the structures we inhabit and live in is based on a very watered down version of history. There's very little truth to the Black experience, and I think when people that are not Black can start embodying the Black experience and saying, what is it like to walk as a Black person into white spaces? What is it to, be ostracized or get to an international airport and be screened because you're not like the others? And I think when we can start to learn what the experience of another is, we can empathize. And when we empathize, we can become better allies. So I'd say start with educating yourself. Follow people who are different to you. Bring people into your social circle, into your life that don't look like you, and speak to them and listen. But listen with empathy, because there's a difference between listening and listening with empathy. After we do that, I think then share what you know. Don't hold it to yourself. Give out that information. Show people, this is where I've got my resources. If you too want to learn, go here. And also be vocal. Be very vocal about your support for these communities.
Absolutely. And now, Candice, you come at this from a very unique angle where you lost your father to racial violence through apartheid in South Africa. And I'm just wondering, how does this world movement, everything that's happening around us right now, how does it trigger you and how do you view it personally?
It's a very interesting place for me to be, in the sense that, of course, my personal story is forgiving the apartheid assassin who killed my father. And it was a racial crime in the sense that my dad was Black, he was white, he was fighting for an oppressive system. And for me right now, it's almost like it's so important to highlight 2 things. Number one is the fact that I can't believe that we're still fighting for equality. So that's one element of it. But then the other element is on a completely different spectrum. And I think to myself, the life my dad lived before his passing is so different to the life I live, which means that movements, riots, moments like this in history do make a difference. So I think that it's so important to look at both sides of the coin and say, you know what, we're not where we should be, but my God, am I grateful that we're so much further than we were. And I think for my kids, they're going to be so much further than I am. And hopefully for the next generation, they'll be so much further than they were.
Yeah, and when that's our collective responsibility to make sure that we do keep pushing the wheel forward and not
That's so
back.
true. Yeah, and I
Um,
think these kind of conversations are exactly what we need.
mm, mm, mm. I just was thinking also about, you know, people's response to the rioting that's happening at the moment. There's been a lot of videos of people looting and destroying stores or shops or things like this. And I believe that it also causes a counter trigger response, which goes, okay, Black Lives Matter, but how does Black Lives Matter relate to this looting and to this, you know, the other form of violence that's also emerging? Is there something that you feel you want to decant from that, what's happening and how we're absorbing it?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things to unpack on that point. You know, I think firstly, we have to start with the fact that wherever human beings are gathered, they're going to be those who are there for the cause. They're going to be those who are there for their nefarious reasons. They're going to be those who are there to, uproot what's happening. So I think it's very important to realize that that's a human thing. It's not a black thing. It's a human thing. Where
Mm-hmm.
more than one person is gathered, there's going to be some sort of, misalignment in some way. So I think it's important to realize that, yes, there are some people who are doing things in order to disrupt the movement, in order to move attention away from what actually matters and what's actually important. And then at the same time, I have to, pose the question to those people who come out and they are so vocal about the looting, they're so vocal about the destruction, but they're not very vocal about the actual lives that are being lost. And to me, that tells me that to you, a building being destroyed is so much more valuable than a black life being taken. And therefore, you would have to then sit back and assess your own prejudice. Where does this come from? Why do I think, why am I so outraged? Because some people were very physically outraged, right? They were very vocal. They were very angry, like viscerally angry at the buildings being burnt and, the looting happening and all these things occurring. But they weren't as angry when a man lost his life. So it's kind of this weird contradiction where, yes, both things are wrong, but you value this thing that inconveniences your way of life more than you value someone else's life. So it's one of those things that we have to continue unpacking as a society. Why do we think that Black people dying is so normal to us? Why does Hollywood perpetuate these stereotypes of when we see a Black person dying, we will always liken it to a movie? It's like I'm living in a movie. But when a white person dies, it's never the same narrative. It's like, what happened? How did this happen? The outrage is very different. So I think I understand where people are coming from to a certain degree, but I do think that they should use that as a question to themselves to unpack where they're coming from when they are so vocal about the looting, but not as vocal about Black Lives Mattering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, certainly we've seen that the looting's not just happening by Black protesters, it's happening interracially, right? So then that also begs the question, who are these people, white people or other races, coming
Yeah.
to these protests for Black Lives Matter that are taking the opportunity to loot a store, right? That's very, very shocking. And how do you think we need to change the narrative? So all of this protesting is fantastic, but we've seen this kind of spike of protest with something like the Me Too movement, which, these topics become the pinnacle of media, and then at some point they subside. But how can we make sure that this narrative and this moment actually does become a trigger for shaping history and for changing the narrative? What do we have to be doing so that we're adopting things into everyday life that do change that narrative and it doesn't just become one more protest that we take photos of and it fizzles out?
Yeah, and what you're saying is so crucial because I think that's what we all fear quietly, but we fear it because I think anytime there is such mass mobilization, such mass outrage, human nature does dictate that these things do die down. We do shift our attention. Tomorrow, if COVID was over, our attention would completely shift to a different issue, a different dynamic, a different, problem that we have to deal with. But I think it's so crucial to start opening dialogues, to have conversations like you and I are having, to bring people that don't look like you into your space. I think it starts from racism is taught, prejudice is taught. And so in order to unlearn these subtle microaggressions, unlearn these societal biases, you have to surround yourself with people that don't look like you. And you have to also, at your family, in your like situation, wherever you may be, when you hear people speaking or making those racist jokes that are just behind closed doors, you have to call them out on that. You know, you have to start making changes within your own immediate environment. It's okay that you want to, you know, put it out there and put it on social media and say, yeah, I support this. But if your racist Uncle Jerry is at the family barbecue, always saying, you know, derogatory things about Black people, and you're just like, oh, you know how Jerry can be. No, we don't know how Jerry can be, because Jerry spreads hate. And what does hate create? Action. And that action then ripples out into someone out there who's going to have an experience with Jerry. Jerry's going to make them feel some type of way. That person's going to take Jerry's reaction and start looking at all people through the lens of how this man behaves. So it's important that we don't just look at mass protests. We have to be on the streets. We have to be doing this. And say, wait, if I own a company, how many people around me are of color? Not because of employment equity, but because how many people do I hire that are different to me? If I am in these, you know, moments of, you know, I mean, I understand when people say they've got a preference when it comes to dating, but blatantly either, you know, fetishizing Black people and saying, oh, I date, you know, I've got jungle fever. Like those kind of notions, we are subconscious, you know. The compliments you say, stop calling Black people articulate. We've learned English for a very long time. I think we got a grasp on it. Okay, like, you know, so it's these microaggressions that, you know, or you're pretty for a Black girl, or, you know, I never thought I'd be attracted to a Black girl before. Like, these aren't compliments. These are silent triggers of racism, and it perpetuates a cycle and these, you know, silent prejudices. So I think it's so important to assess yourself, say, where am I prejudiced? Where am I not? How can I change this? And how can I become more inclusive in my company, in my life, in my overall lived experience and situation?
Absolutely. And Candice, you're a huge advocate for forgiveness. You went as far as to say earlier, and it's a big part of your work, that you've actually forgiven the person that murdered your father as a racial crime, which is a huge statement to make, and one that very few people can really say. How do you feel forgiveness plays into this whole movement? And you know, basically, yeah, let's say, what's the role? What is it that we can take from the concept of forgiveness and apply to this mass movement?
I mean, firstly, thank you for asking. I think it's something that I too had to sit down with and, you know, deconstruct and ask myself, like, can the two coexist within a movement like this? And thankfully for me, I had to sit down with myself, get really honest and say, yeah, it's so crucial, because it goes down to the very sentiment of what I believe forgiveness to be. And that is freeing yourself. You know, forgiveness is always about you. It's always about the person who's been hurt. You know, because although we don't bring these situations to us, we do get hurt. Things do happen to us. But what we don't understand is when we hold on to resentment, anger, and pain, what we really are doing is we re-perpetrating the crime over and over. Every time you think of that person, that incident comes flooding back. So it didn't happen to you once. It happens to you every time you remember it. It happens to you every time you see that person. It happens to you every single time something triggers that moment. And so for me, forgiveness is really about, how do I detach myself emotionally from this painful incident, from this painful moment, so that I can be in control of my life, so that I can dictate how I move through life and not someone else who hurt me. So I think the role forgiveness plays is when we start to forgive, when we start to heal ourselves as individuals, and we deal with how we were raised, how, you know, these patterns and conditions came to be within us, then we individually start to change. And when we individually start to change, we're not going to be as hateful towards each other. We're going to be more empathetic with each other, because it's been proven. The more empathy you show yourself, the more self-compassion you show yourself, the more you can show another human being. And so when we all individually start to heal our own bullshit and we come to terms with what hurts us, we will be better people. Because let's be honest, you know, I cannot for the life of me phantom, unless you're a sociopath or, you know, you really do have a mental condition, someone just wanting to kill another person. I can't imagine that. Someone of sane and sober mind just going to go kill someone because they look different, they act different, they triggered something in them. It's not the human condition. But someone who's wounded wants to wound other people. So I think that's where forgiveness comes in. I think it becomes a holistic approach to the situation of, can we all start to heal? Can we all start to be honest about where we are paining, where we can't cope, so that we don't have to, repeat the cycle of pain, and we can stop it so that we can stop perpetuating it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we're definitely going to have to deconstruct further as our shows evolve, because this is an ongoing conversation and an ongoing topic that requires constant addressing. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story, a part of your story anyways. And I think we're looking forward to unpacking the whole concept of racism, Black Lives Matter, violence, triggers for violence as we move along in the show. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.
Yay, I'm so happy we finally did our first episode, and that it was so impactful and it was so important. And again, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll be unpacking these kind of, issues. We'll be talking about it in depth, and I think it's so crucial for the dynamic of the world to keep seeing these kind of interactions happening. So guys, thank you so much, and we look forward to engaging with you guys further.